my screen won't let me go on. Oh, there we are. Sorry, now it jammed for a second. Okay, so the agenda for this evening is really single item of how to write a successful grant application. My presentation will take anywhere between 30 to 35 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion and questions afterwards through the chat function. As Sue said, so we're recording the session this evening, so it will be shared with everybody that's here, and we'll also be sharing a copy of the slides. So don't worry if you miss anything, you'll have this as a reference document to look back on when you might be writing grant applications anytime in the future. So what are we aiming for? So the goal here is to write the very best application that you can that will give your project the greatest chance of success and securing the funding that you need to deliver it in your local area. So one of the questions that often comes up is where to start. And what I've just illustrated here is a route map. And the first place is often is what are your needs and your best place. You live in your local community. Understand what is it that you would most like maybe in 2024, but also maybe longer term over the next 3 to 5 years. Do the research and know what the grants are, and they can be from the very small grants of several hundred, a couple of thousand, right up to the 200,000 or 500,000 or bigger still. And for those that are familiar with preparing grants, you'll know that it's not just as simple as downloading the application form and writing it. And there's often a lot of other information that is needed. So we use the term being shovel ready. So we'll talk a little bit about that as part of this webinar. And the bit with the arrow there, that writing a high quality application, that's what we're really going to focus on tonight. And I'm going to be giving you some sample text and sort of illustrations to how you might approach typical questions you would see in application forms. And then hopefully that will lead to successful grant applications. And the other important thing to remember there, and I see it many times, is that not every grant application you write will be successful. And that doesn't mean that it's not a worthwhile project or that you haven't written a high quality application. Sometimes there's just too many applications against the funding available. So what I'd always say, keep in mind, is that do your very best to write a high quality application and have everything in place. And if that doesn't succeed for whatever reason, you have it then to go to other grants. So it's never a waste of time. So in terms of being prepared and having everything ready for when a grant application program might be announced, one of the things that often comes up in application forms that they'll ask is, what are your needs? And the type of things that they're looking for is, have you consulted with the relevant stakeholders in your local area? That could be your businesses, the other community groups, households living in the area. Have you analysed the CSO data or the PUBL data? And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this webinar. The next really important thing is know the grants that are available, know the deadlines, know the type of criteria that will make your project successful, know the types of matching fund rates, and also the success rates. Different grants have more funding available, which then makes some easier to potentially get than others. One of the best ways to find out about grants is to visit similar projects in the county or further afield. So if you know, say, if you want to renovate your community hall, or you want to put a park in your community or a walking trail or a tourism project, go and have a look and talk to groups that have done something similar. Ask them which grants they secured and get any advice or tips they might give you. Once you've done those bits, looking at then for capital projects, so that's your construction projects. It's really important that you have the following items below. So firstly would be things like drawings. So if it's for either a building extension or a new build, or for a park, have you got landscape drawings? Or for a walking trail, have you got a map showing where the trail is going? Or maybe you're doing signage. So do you have drawings indicating what's going to be on the signs? Once you have those, it's much easier then to get prices for it. And that can be either through QS costings, it can be through approaching suppliers for quotes, or doing a more formal procurement, possibly even on e-tenders. Other things that grant applications often look for is they'll ask you, do you have environmental or heritage consents if relevant? So for the environmental consents, it's often to do with projects that might be located in special areas of conservation or special protection areas. And with heritage, you might have a heritage building or been within the curtilage, which is within the boundary of a heritage site. And again, you can get more guidance on that. If you're doing a construction project, then typically planning will be required. So you'll need to go through that, and drawings will obviously be required. If you don't require planning, a lot of applications might require a proof of planning exempted development. And that's something that you can apply to via Wexford County Council. And it's a declaration of exempted development section 5. And I think there's an €80 fee for that. Again, you'll often see it for those that are familiar with applying for grants. They'll look for proof of either the land title, so do you own it and is it in your organisation's name? Or if not, do you have a lease or license agreement for that? And they'll typically want proof of it. The next piece is the proof of matching funds. There's a few grants like the Climate Action one at the moment, which is 100% grant aided, which is fantastic. But more often they might fund only say 80% or 75% or 50%. And some funding bodies look for proof of matching funds at time of application. So that can often be a copy of your bank statement or statement from your credit union showing that the matching funds is there. Or it might be a letter stating that a loan is in place if you're successful from, say, Clan Credo or Community Finance Ireland. Sometimes as well, bridging finance can be an issue because you have to pay the invoices up front if you're successful. So to assist with cash flow, bridging finance might be required. And if you're looking at all these items on this page thinking, yeah, I've got all those in place, then you could be in a very good position to apply for grants this year or in the short term. But alternatively, if you're looking at that and thinking, I'm not sure I have those yet, then it might be worth considering applying for a grant for a feasibility study to get a consultant to work with you to put those items together. And that leads me on to the next slide. Often when we think about grants, we think about capital grants, and that will be the focus of this webinar. But there are often other elements that can be really helpful for community groups to apply for. So that could be a feasibility study, which I've just talked about. It could also be for a training program. So maybe a group of communities might be interested in setting up community cafes, for example, or daycare facilities or youth clubs, and you want training on how to do that. And sometimes you can apply for training grants to upskill the committees to be able to deliver, particularly, say, new social enterprises or ambitious projects. Sometimes you can apply for marketing grants. So that could be for your branding or your social media or your website, pull up banners, signage, and then also employment schemes. Although a lot of employment schemes often occur through the community employment or the TUS scheme. So for those of you that are familiar with doing grant applications, you'll know that each grant application tends to be different. And of course, according to the scale of the grant you're applying for, if you're going for a smaller grant, typically the application form is more straightforward. where if you're going for a larger grant, maybe 200,000 or 500,000, then often a lot more documents are required. Once you have an idea which grant you are going to be going for, it's very useful to, one, look through the grant guidelines, look through the complete application form first, just to get a sense of the questions they're asking and whether you can answer them all. Talk to the funding organisation. Are they available via email or on the phone? Or maybe they're running online seminars like this, but specifically on their particular grant. Or sometimes you'll see that there's a recording on their website that you can listen to at your convenience and get the background information. Some grants also, bodies also put up lists of successful applicants in the past, so you can see the types of projects that have been awarded. That gives you a good idea of the type of things that other people have successfully secured money for. Useful to get in touch with applicants who've previously got that grant and talk to them and see if they can give you any advice. A lot of guidelines will also talk about the eligibility criteria, and they'll often list what it will fund and what it won't fund. So do check that carefully and make sure that only items that are eligible are in your application form. They often in the guidelines also talk about the aim of the grant and what they're trying to achieve. That can vary from year to year. So if you're looking at things like the Town and Village Renewal Programme, each year they tend to change the focus of the program. So make sure you're aligning it with the key aims that they are for each year. They also often talk about a scoring process and what they're going to be prioritizing, and make sure the text in your application form reflects that. And then finally, find someone on your committee who's got the good writing skills, maybe likes writing, and often you might be able to attach supporting documents with your application. That could include photographs, drawings. Making your project look as attractive as possible is very helpful. You may have found that increasingly there's online applications now rather than ones that you would download, and that you need to create an account. And sometimes they also make soft copies available that you can download and print so that you can look at those in advance before going onto the online account to complete it. And just a few tips: make sure that you leave plenty of time for the upload. Don't leave it too close to the deadline, because sometimes the websites can go down. And then using the save function as you go along so that you don't lose any of your information. So now if we just look a little bit more about what some of the typical questions might be in an application form. And I've just listed here the types of ones you might see in the Town and Village Renewal Expression of Interest form. This is a grant administered by Wexford County Council, typically around the summer or early autumn each year. And what they do is they issue this expression of interest first, which is a kind of shortened version of an application form. And you can see the list of questions that they have here, and I'll go through those in more detail. But these type of questions you'd see on many grant applications, whether that's LEADER or FLAG or the Local Enhancement Programme or the Climate Action Programme. So hopefully the types of questions that we'll cover will be relevant for many of the grants that you might be applying for. I've also included down the bottom, where you can see my cursor here, the cross-cutting themes. And at the moment, what I would see in a lot of grants is an interest in how you're addressing sustainability and climate action. And then also accessibility for those that have special needs, and then also tackling disadvantage. So those are often really important things to consider when you're writing and preparing your application. So we'll look at each of these items in more detail. Bear with me while it moves on. Yeah. There we are. Who is the applicant? So often it's really good, and I imagine most of you are registered with the PPN, which is why you're here this evening. And many of you may also be registered with a national structure like Tidy Towns, for example. Um, Having a constitution is important. Keeping your annual general meetings up to date and a record of your annual accounts. Often they may be asked for as supporting information. You'll typically need either a bank account or a credit union account in the organization's name of the actual applicant. So just make sure they match. And then when you're adding the supporting documents to the application form, so that could be quotes or your planning or lease or bank statement, make sure again that everything ties back nicely to the applicant's name, which could be the name of your community group. Sometimes they'll ask, do you have a tax reference number or tax clearance access number? If you don't have those, then I've given you the link here. And when you get a copy of these slides, you can just copy that in, and that will take you directly to the form that you can complete to register yourself so that you can get those tax details. And then they might also ask, are you registered for VAT? And if not, can you prove you're not? And again, that's something that the revenue can provide you with. And the different grant agencies, whether it's Leader or whatever, can advise you further on that. Another question often comes up is, do you have a website and do you have a social media profile? So that could be your Facebook page, your Instagram. So include that. Okay. People struggling tonight to move on to the next slide. Bear with me one moment. Just going to.
Want me to try from here?
Yeah, do.
Yeah.
It's not something that I've encountered before, but I don't know if you'll be able to pull on the slides.
It's like it's frozen.
Yeah.
Try the little three dot there. Now I'd say.
I see if it works this way.
Yep.
Yeah,
There
here
we
we
go.
are.
Yeah.
Okay, so project summary. So often they might ask you what is the summary of your particular project. So I've just given you some sample sentences here. And hopefully they won't be directly suitable for you, but sometimes it's useful to have a starting point. And once you get an idea of the type of way of phrasing these sentences, you can then amend them and change them around to suit your particular project. Often you might see that it's restricted word count, so 30 words, 50 words, that kind of thing. I've included in red the type of thing where, that's where you'd include the name of your village, for example. Make this as personal as possible to your particular area. And you can say just from the examples, one's around, say, a community and enterprise resource centre, one's around an immersive heritage experience, or refurbishing community centres, or developing a year-round tourism destination. These are all typical types of community projects you might see. After you've done your summary in your application form, they often ask for more detailed descriptions of what you're actually trying to do. And often the way that I approach this is through using headings, underline, bullet points, anything to help break up the text and make it easier for you to structure and for the evaluator to read. Often with projects, you might find that it can touch on a number of headings. So, it might have an economic dimension that you can see in this example here, where what I've got as just a sample is the refurbishment of a community centre to deliver a wide range of new services. And then when you look at the economic, that could be the remote working hub or a training facility. And then in the background text, it's what are you trying to do? How do you see there's a need for it? and then given some other examples like a study hub or weekend markets. And then looking at the social element to your project. So that could be anything from, say, a community internet cafe, and that you're needing a new equipment so that it complies with health and safety. Or it could be looking at online shopping service for the elderly, possibly linked in with the secondary school transition year program, or looking at clubs and the Irish culture. So that could be anything from drama, music, cookery classes, and so on. And then other elements that are very common in community applications would be healthy communities. So looking at sport and fitness. So again, if we were coming back to, say, the refurbishment of a community centre, it could be looking at when the new sports floor is installed, you can deliver a much wider range of sporting activities, and you can give the examples. And then referencing the cross-cutting themes that I referred to earlier. So climate change is one that we hear a lot about. So you can talk about, you might be installing solar panels or upgrading the building fabric, putting in an EV charging point, rainwater harvesting system, or putting in roof and wall insulation. And then finally, in terms of the grounds outside, you might be doing something on biodiversity, so planting native trees and shrubs. So hopefully what I've given you here is just some sample text. And it's not a question of copying and pasting it for yourself, but hopefully this will just give you some ideas around how to approach some of these questions that you can then use for your own applications. So another question that you might have come across is project rationale. So why are you doing this particular project? And typically they might ask you these kind of things around describing your village. So what they're often looking for there is certainly background information from the CSO or the POBL data. Where is it geographically located? So is it within a town? Is it quite remote? What is it renowned or special for? Any potential assets that you have? Maybe you're on the coast, or you're in a river, or you have a castle. What sort of businesses or hospitality do you have? And then looking at what are the deficits. So what are you missing? So maybe you have no community buildings, or you don't have a park, or very few shops, or none at all. Maybe your population is declining. Maybe you've poor broadband or coastal erosion, flooding. So you'll probably recognize some of these things might be relevant for your particular area. And then in terms of the opportunities, so maybe you have derelict buildings that could be restored, or you have a community building that's only used in the evenings, or maybe you have some stunning natural assets that could be enjoyed further, or maybe it's around your heritage or your culture. So it's really about talking about what's special within your local area. And then how will the project make a positive impact on your town or village? And again, talk about that from both the economic, social, environmental, health, accessibility, the youth, older people, new communities. Not all of those will be relevant to you, but do pick up on the ones that are most suited. So I've been talking a good bit about the CSO data, and I think it's really important that you certainly within your grant application reference the statistics relevant to your local area. So I'll just talk about this in a little bit more detail. Firstly, we're really fortunate that the 2022 data is now out and available. So you can really get the most accurate picture on your particular village or town. You can also look back at, say, the 2016 data or further back, and you can compare trends over the period. You can also compare it to the county average or the national average, so that can show whether your area is in line with national trends, or maybe you've got, say, higher levels of dereliction or higher levels of unemployment, which is all connected with the project that you want to get funding for. And you'll see the two links that I have here, one for CSO and one for POBL. So again, when you get copies of these slides, you can just pick up these links and put them into your browser, and that will bring you straight through to the relevant page. So this is an example for those maybe that haven't used the CS data before, of what it looks like when you go into their interactive map. So I've just given you a screen grab and taken the area around New Ross. And you can see each of these are small areas. And if you go up here, you can see where my cursor is. You can see at the moment I've got it on the year 2022. And then I've got small areas. And what you do is you can click in, say we were doing something on New Ross, maybe we wanted a new playground in this small area here. You could click into that and you'll pick up the census data in terms of how many children under the age of 18 are living in this area, how many lone families there are, how many older people there are, how many people with disabilities, how many people with cars. So you can get a lot of data from picking up any one of these small areas. And then just to give you an illustration of the Pobble Deprivation Index. This is really, really important because often in grant applications, funders will prioritize applications from areas with high levels of disadvantage. So again, I've chosen a similar geographical area. So you can see New Ross here, and you can see each of these again represents the small areas. And the key here is the areas shaded in the darker orange are the most disadvantaged. So this just gives you a visual here of this one particular small area that you can see it's minus 29.61. So it's classified as very disadvantaged. And then you can see if you scroll down on this bar here, that would pull up more information. It gives you here just the lone parent ratio and the primary education statistics, but there's a lot more if you pull down on this. So these are really important information to pull into your application form. The other thing to bear in mind is that, let's take an example. Say you were doing a heritage project in this small area here to the south of New Ross, which would be probably a marginally above average area. But what you would want to stress is that it's very close to the urban town of New Ross, which has high levels of disadvantage. So you can still pull it into your project, even if your particular small area isn't as disadvantaged. Another question that you might see in applications is who will be implementing the project. So then I suggest you go back to naming what your project is. So in this instance, it could be the installation of a park or a refurbished community centre. And then it will be undertaken by, so we could call it Boulevard Tidy Towns, for example, in collaboration with. And what I suggest you do here is that you be as specific as possible. So you name the different groups. So the Tidy Towns, the Men's Shed, if there's a walking trail. And again, put names on the local businesses or the parish council, the preschool facility. And then you can also say that this project will be implemented in accordance with the County Development Plan, Objectives 22 to 28. And you can also reference here the local economic and community plan that's just been published by Wexford County Council. And you may also have other either local area plans, town centre first plan. I know Enniscorthy and New Ross have those, for example, or you may have your own 5-year community plan. So again, reference that here. Another question that might come up in a grant application is your compatibility with strategic plans. And if they do, then one way of approaching this question is to reference the name of the strategic document. So in this instance, it could be the County Development Plan 22 to 28. And you can use here, say, if it's an online form, different coloured text to say that this is the extract from the County Development Plan here in the green text. And then the text underneath is the example of how your project achieves the county development plan objective. So again, I've just given you some different examples just as a sample of how to approach this type of question. And then hopefully this might be text that you can refer back to when you're writing your own question, and you can amend it to suit. I certainly wouldn't be recommending that you copy and paste any of this, but it might just give you ideas of how to approach these questions, and then you'll know how to fill in the detail based on the particular characteristics of your project. But these are just some that I've chosen that I would typically see as community projects in County Wexford. So, the first one is developing high quality recreation and play facilities. And there's the county development plan objective, and then there's your particular project. For the next one down, it's looking at large community facilities that you want to develop in your community. And again, that's the compatibility with the county development plan objective. And then finally on this page, it's about, again, the creation of a park. So this is the county development plan objective, and then this is what you're actually going to achieve in your local area. So the county development plan, that is definitely one of the plans I would see very frequently referenced in grant applications. Again, you'll get the link here from these slides that you can just paste into your browser, and that will bring you straight into this page where you'll see reference to the county development plan. I've just highlighted here a few of the key sections. So if you look at chapter 3 here, the core strategy, that's where it will tell you the classification of your own settlement. Every settlement in County Wexford is named in it, and they're categorized. So it's important to reference that in your grant application. And then what I'd suggest here is, depending on what you're wanting to do, so maybe if you're doing an economic project, look at chapter 6 and their objectives there, or if it's a tourism project, chapter 7. If it's a community infrastructure project, then maybe chapter 9 or chapter 15 here would be very, very relevant to you. So again, have a look through those and pick the relevant objectives for your project. Here's some other strategic plans that you may be very familiar with. So our Rural Future, Rural Development Policy 2021 to 2025 is very relevant for many of the villages and towns in this county, because we're predominantly a rural county. People may also be familiar with the Embracing Islands Outdoor National Outdoor Strategy. And there's some other ones as well. Climate Action Plan, the 2024 Climate Action Plan is now available online. Wexford County Council has its own age-friendly strategy. So there's a lot of project ideas and objectives in that. There's the county tourism strategy. And then, as I say, the National Outdoor Recreation Strategy. But you'll know from your own sector, if you're doing a youth project, look up the National Youth Policy. If it's a travellers project, look that up. If it's an older person, again, look up some other national strategies too. They'll often ask you to detail the types of community consultation that you've completed in an application form. So I've just listed some examples here. So that's everything from surveys, public meetings, information events, maybe feedback or interviews with customers or local businesses. Any feedback you may have had from government agencies, so that could be Wexford County Council, could be Fawter Island, National Parks and Wildlife Service. Again, it depends a little bit on the type of project that you're hoping to do. And then just detail, any workshops, focus groups, site visits, or reference strategic plans, action plans, or health checks that you may have carried out. So I've put this slide in, and you'll remember I referred to it at the beginning in terms of, are you shovel ready? I deliberately use this graphic over here with the sledgehammer and the rock, because this is really often one of the hardest things for groups to achieve. And so it's often the best place to start. Many capital grant applications require proof of planning or an exemption, as I spoke about earlier. So getting that in place is critically important. Proof of land title It's fine if you own the land or the building that the capital project is on. But if you don't, making sure that you've got a lease or license in place. And different grants will often ask for different lengths of time for the lease to be valid. So do check that out well in advance, because it can take a period of time to get a lease extended if you need to. Also, often it's not necessarily just enough to have a lease agreement in place. You'll actually need a letter from the owner giving permission for the works. And then in addition, if it's an environmental project or a heritage project, particular consents will be required from the relevant bodies. So this is a question that people may have been familiar with in grant applications, where they ask, what are the objectives of the proposed project and how will the intended outputs and outcomes be measured? So what I've tried to do here again is just to give you some samples. And again, these aren't intended as a copy and paste, but do have a look at these and you might be able to change the wording to reflect your particular projects. And hopefully it just gives you an idea of how to approach this type of question. So the objective could be to establish a social enterprise community internet cafe. So that's what you're trying to achieve. So the output, what's going to be delivered as a result of the grant? So it could be a refurbished kitchen, including a new roof, windows, doors, kitchen units, electrical goods, to then set up the community cafe. And the outcome then will be reduced social isolation, greater community integration. And how to measure its success could be the number of people using the cafe. You could also have number of people employed in the local cafe. You could have the amount of income generated through the cafe. All of those would be good measurements as well. So the objective, another one just as a sample, to develop an enterprise training and remote working hub. So the output from the grant is actually going to be refurbished meeting rooms to include new roof, windows, cavity wall insulation, heating, electrical works, so that an enterprise training and remote hub can be established in the community centre. And the outcomes would be increased local employment or enhanced skilled workforce. And then the measurements could be the number of businesses using the hub and the number of people using it for remote working, or the number of people using it for a training event. And the same principle applies in the bottom one around operating weekend markets and sports and social activities in the community centre. So I've tried to show a range of different project types and how you might approach it. And please do also extend any of the ideas here. This is just a sample of text and ideas that might be appropriate. Another question that we increasingly see coming up on grant applications is, how will your project address the UN Sustainable Development Goals? Or they might ask the county development plan objectives, or how does it link with your town centre first objectives? So I've just given you a sample here of how to approach it in relation to the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. They're not all likely to be relevant to you. So what I recommend you do is take, in this instance, I've just taken 3 that are, potentially most relevant to a project. So take the Sustainable Development Goal and you can highlight that or underline it, and then show directly underneath it how your project will address that goal in your local area. And the same then for, say, climate action, and then finally for life on land. And then moving on to costings, which is usually near the end of a particular grant application. The first thing I'd like to point out is, do check the rules to see what's required with regards to sourcing costings. Different applications have different requirements. So some might require full procurement at time of application. That was a requirement of LEADER under the last programme round, and may well be again, but we'll have to wait and see. They might just require QS costings, or it might be just 1 quotation or 3 quotations. So again, just look at what it says in the guidelines and then make sure you follow it. You'll also see in the guidelines what the level of matching funds are and whether they require proof of matching funds at time of application. And I'd also advise just check the payment schedule Typically, most grants expect you to make the cost to the contractors first, and then you can draw down the grant, often in phases or milestones, typically 2 or 3 over the period of the grant, particularly for some of the larger grants. But that might require bridging finance, and that, again, proof of that might be required at time of application. And you'll notice here, I've just put in a little smiley face and a bubble here. One thing that I've seen increasingly over the last few years is cost inflation, where we would have had some excellent projects that have been approved. And then because by the time the project is approved, the contract awarded to the community group, and then they go out to, say, full procurement, the cost has increased considerably from when they may have got their original quotations as part of their grant application. So that is something to be really wary of at the moment. And just be careful when you're sourcing your quotes that you think they really are realistic, and maybe ask the contractors how long will they hold that quote for. And another piece I often see is make sure as much as possible that you include all your costs. Often it might be that you think of other costs, can be actually just as simple as once you've handed your application form in, you think of others, or maybe when you go to implement it, you realize there's a few other costs that you should have thought of. I think the best way to try and minimize that risk is to talk to other projects that have completed something similar and ask them and get them to list through all of the things. Some of the things could be things like ESB connection charges might catch people out, or if you can put in a contingency in your application form, if that's allowed, that can also help you for that item. Often you have a chance to add in additional information. So photographs are excellent because it gives the evaluator who might not know your project a really good idea of the site and your community. Maps and drawings where they're available, any kind of summary report, supporting letters, copies of strategic plans that are relevant to your particular project or extracts from them. Proof of ownership might be required, proof of planning, and then constitutions. Just want to draw your attention to this example. So this is a grants booklet that is completed in Kilkenny. We don't have one as yet anyway for Wexford County Council, but a lot of the grants that they list here would also be applicable to County Wexford. So I've given you the browser website for this, and I find this an excellent guide because if you go into it, it will tell you the types of items that are eligible under each of these, and it also tells you the time of year that these grants are typically open. So that enables you to help plan your projects and when you know that you might expect an application form being made available. The only one that definitely isn't relevant for our county is the CLAR programme. That's something that we don't have in County Wexford. Another place where they have calendars of grants is the Department of Rural and Community Development, which has many of the grant schemes that community groups in County Wexford would apply for. So I did a quick check. The calendar for 2024 isn't out yet. But again, what I would strongly recommend is that you look up this link here and look at the calendar for 2023, because that might give you a guide as to when the programs will be available in 2024. It won't be perfect, but at least it might give you some idea, one, of the types of programs they operate, and two, when they might become available. Other very useful sources is the PPN. I think we all love the PPN emails telling us about all the grants and when they're available. It's fantastic. So all of you, I'd imagine, are registered and is getting that information. Other places you can go is the Wheels, fundingpoint.ie, but a subscription is required for that. And then just moving forward to the end of the presentation here, just to leave you with, this is quite a useful table that you could take and plan the types of grants that you want to go for. particularly as we've spoken about, a lot of them require you to be shovel ready. So it's not as simple as just waiting for, say, the PPN announcement when a particular grant might be open. The deadlines are often very, very fast, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and you have to complete your application. So if you're needing things like drawings or planning permission or lease agreements, that's too short a period of time. So what I'd suggest is that if you've got several projects in your community that you would like to approach, maybe in 2024 or 2025, using a table such as this to plan them, what are the grants that you're looking for? Which is the organizations that they come from. Maybe put the link in so that you can share it with your committee members and you can all keep in touch with that particular website to make sure you get the most up-to-date information. And then purpose, what are you thinking about it for your own community? Is it refurbishing your community centre, buying new sports equipment, refitting your kitchen? And then do you know the application deadline? And if so, put it in. And the size of the grants, is it a small one of 500 euros, a couple of thousand, or is it one of the bigger ones, 50,000, 100,000 or bigger? And then you could just jot in here what you think's required, which ones require lease or planning and which ones don't, and then the timeline here. And then just to draw your attention to some of the grants that are currently open. Many of you may have seen this, the Community Climate Action Programme. So the deadline is the 6th of March. It's the first time this programme's been out. It's 100% grant, up to 100,000. There's 3 different levels, 20,000 and under, up to 50,000, and then up to 100,000. Clinton Donovan in the climate action team in Wexford County Council is over that programme. And I know he's talking to and visiting a lot of groups that are interested in that. So do look at that if you think that's relevant and get in touch with them. Another one, the Local Enhancement Programme. That's a smaller grant, but it's a lovely, much simpler grant that would help a lot of simple, quick projects that you might have in mind for your particular community. The deadline is coming up very soon, the 23rd of February. So do look at that. And then finally, people may be familiar with the LEADER programme and also the FLAG programme. Those are both EU programmes, and they've been closed in recent months because the last round was finished, but they will be opening up again this year. If you go on to this link in Wexford Local Development, you can register for their email updates so that you'll get the very latest information as it becomes available. And FLAG again is one to watch. The PPN will be making any announcements as soon as it becomes available. So in summary, timing and preparation is everything, particularly for the bigger grants. And the way to help you there is to make sure you know your grant program deadlines. Keep an eye on the relevant websites. Assess the grant programs. They're not all equal. Some are easier to be successful with than others. Strongly recommend that you build a relationship with the funding organization through, attending their webinars, emailing them, seeing if they maybe will do a site visit to your community. Building a positive track record, so drawing down your grants on time and completing your projects, making sure you meet the criteria and the score sheet. Ensure you have all the right paperwork, and I've just added in here the devil's in the detail. And then just managing the paperwork, just having simple folders on PCs or having 1 or 2 committee members that maybe hold the information, and also copies of previous grant applications. So often they can have valuable information that you want to bring forward into new applications. And so just finally, thank you very much for listening. And thanks to the PPN, Sue and Ian, for organising this, and wishing all of you the very best. I know we had, was it 75, I think, Sue, that registered for this event, which is fantastic. And we'll be sharing the slides and the recordings with everybody that is registered. So I'll do a stop sharing now, and then we can go on to any questions that people may have.
Yeah, I'll just stop the recording there now as well.
My God. Thanks for doing all the techie